Each student will attempt to pierce this material. This exercise assesses your understanding of force. Cadet Holt, your weapon is wood. Yes, it is. The Weapons and Force Application module at the Coalition Interspecies Military Academy was, by the standards of the curriculum, a straightforward practical assessment. The exercise brief was explicit. Each cadet would select, or be assigned, a standard implement from their home species' historical martial tradition. They would then demonstrate an understanding of force application principles by attempting to pierce a specimen of coalition-grade alloy paneling, the same material used in starship hull construction, with that implement. The exercise was not expected to produce successful penetration for most students. The point was the methodology, the angle of attack, the distribution of force, and the understanding of why certain approaches worked better against certain materials. Success was defined as demonstrating correct principles, not by putting a hole through the panel. The alloy panel had, over the 17 years this exercise had been conducted, never actually been pierced. The highest performing student in Academy history had produced an indentation of 2.3 millimeters using a Velcro plasma-enhanced blade. The panel's material resistance rating was, as the equipment documentation noted, approximately 60 times the yield strength of the strongest alloy the Academy's equipment budget could have substituted. Orin Holt had been assigned the wooden spear. This was not an accident. The assignment process used a randomized selection algorithm which was technically accurate, but the algorithm's pool of options for human cadets had been submitted by the Human Military Exchange Liaison Office. The liaison had chosen to include the wooden spear as an option with a frequency weight that reflected its historical significance to Earth's martial heritage, rather than its perceived usefulness in a modern combat environment. The other human cadets had drawn energy blades, chemical projectile weapons, and compact impact weapons. Orin had drawn the spear. He looked at it for about 45 seconds after it was handed to him. Then he picked it up, balanced it in his hand, checked the tip, ran his thumb along the grain of the shaft, and nodded once. The specific nod of someone completing a brief assessment and arriving at a conclusion. The laughter began during the walk to the demonstration floor. It was not mean-spirited, exactly. The alien cadets were not cruel individually, but they operated within a collective social framework where the gap between a hand-carved wooden implement and a coalition-grade alloy panel was so enormous that finding it amusing was almost involuntary. Several of them carried weapons capable of producing some of the highest scores in the exercise's history. The idea of using a wooden spear in this context was, by every available metric, absurd. Orin let them laugh. He watched the first 4 cadets complete their attempts. Each approached the task thoughtfully. Each demonstrated correct force application principles. Each produced indentations ranging from barely visible marks to the impressive 1.8 millimeter result achieved by Cadet Thraw's plasma blade. Throughout it all, Orin simply held the spear loosely in his hand and observed. Instructor Vale called his name. Orin walked to the demonstration position with the spear held vertically in his right hand. By this point, the laughter in the room had reached its peak. The unmistakable hilarity of watching someone approach a task with a simple wooden stick that, by every available metric, was completely unsuited for it. He set his feet. He did not hold the spear the way the textbook illustrations showed. He held it the way his grandfather had taught him, which was the way his grandfather's grandfather had been taught. A tradition stretching back farther than Orin had ever cared to trace with any precision. His grip was simultaneously relaxed and loaded. The shaft was positioned not merely as a thrusting weapon but as a lever. His body's rotation, rather than the extension of his arms, became the primary generator of force. The spear technique had been developed long before metallurgy, long before advanced alloys, on a single world where the intended targets were biological. Yet the physics behind it did not care what material stood in its path. What mattered was the concentration of force. The hand-carved spear tip had been carefully shaped with precise facets that reflected generations of geological knowledge from ancient stone tool traditions. The edges had been maintained with a whetstone Orin had carried in his pack. It was not a large contact surface. It was an exceptionally small one, sharpened to a geometry that focused the force of impact onto the smallest possible point. Orin rotated through the throw. The spear struck the coalition alloy panel. The sound it produced was not the familiar metallic clang of a weapon striking an unyielding surface before bouncing away. It was different. It was the unmistakable sound of a point that had found the material's grain at precisely the correct angle, driven with enough force to exceed the threshold between resistance and penetration. The spear tip entered the panel. 3.1 millimeters. The room fell so completely silent that the soft hum of the ceiling panels became audible. Instructor Vale immediately crossed the room and examined the penetration depth reading displayed on the assessment instrument in his hand. He read it once. Then he recalibrated the instrument. He read it again. Only then did he look at Orin. 3.1 millimeters, he said. There was no dramatic emphasis in his voice. It was simply the accurate statement of a measurement that had just become the highest result in the 17-year history of the exercise. Orin walked to the panel and examined the penetration point. Then he retrieved his spear. The tip remained intact. The shaft was unbroken. The wood had simply done exactly what it had been shaped to do. The nearest alien cadet, the one who had laughed the loudest only moments earlier, stared silently at the panel. The laughter had disappeared from his face. In its place was the unmistakable expression of someone whose understanding of reality had just been rewritten, and who was still trying to determine what that new understanding meant. The concentration of force, Vale said, addressing the entire class rather than Orin specifically, because the room needed the explanation more than he did. The panel's resistance rating assumes distributed force. The spear tip's contact geometry concentrates that force beyond what the resistance calculation was designed to account for. He paused, allowing the realization to settle across the room. This is a principle that predates advanced alloys by thousands of years on Earth. It was originally developed for biological targets, but the physics remain exactly the same. He set the assessment instrument aside. Cadet Holt, please walk the class through your grip positioning and throwing mechanics, beginning with the initiation of body rotation. Orin looked first at the panel, then at the class. 40 alien cadets stood before him, each in a different stage of recalibrating everything they had assumed. The laughter was completely gone, replaced by curiosity, confusion, and genuine attention. He quietly returned to his starting position. The rotation begins here, he said. His hands naturally settled into the grip his grandfather had taught him. Then he began explaining a technique that humanity had understood for thousands of years. A technique that had just, against every expectation in the room, produced the highest result in 17 years of coalition military assessment. In the back row, the cadet who had laughed the loudest was now writing furiously in his class notebook, carefully recording every detail of the technique he had dismissed only minutes before. Orin noticed. He said nothing. He simply continued teaching. The session report that Instructor Vale filed afterward included the following assessment summary. Cadet Holt achieved the highest penetration depth in the history of the exercise, 3.1 millimeters, using a pre-metallurgical implement. The technique demonstrates an advanced understanding of force concentration principles. It is recommended that Earth historical weapon traditions be incorporated into the curriculum for the force application module. Human martial heritage, as demonstrated, contains applications of physics that remain relevant regardless of technological advancement. The curriculum was updated the following semester. The wooden spear was officially added to the Academy's standard equipment list. Ancient Earth knowledge had earned its place alongside the most advanced weapons in the coalition, not because it was newer, but because the laws of physics had never changed.